All right, strap yourselves in. We're going deep on this one, folks. UK and China, big news coming out of their recent get-together. And this isn't just your usual run-of-the-mill diplomacy. We're talking potentially seismic shifts, global power plays, finance, the whole shebang. We've got some really insightful reporting on their economic and financial dialogue, or EFD for those in the know. And let me tell you, this is going to be good.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, especially the timing of it all. This is the first EFD they've had since, was it 2019?
Yeah, 2019.
Right. So there's been a bit of, well, let's just say things haven't been all sunshine and roses between them the last few years. So this is pretty significant, them coming back to the table like this.
Huge. You don't just casually brush aside years of tension and suddenly decide to ink deals worth hundreds of millions, potentially billions of pounds.
That's right. We're talking about 600 million minimum over the next 5 years, but could easily hit a billion. And this is just the start. This isn't just about trade either. This touches on, well, pretty much everything. Finance, climate change.
Sure.
Yeah, even the future, like how the global power structure might look in the coming years. It's really interesting to think about how China might leverage this,
Absolutely. Like, here you have a traditional ally of the U.S., right? Deciding to go all in with China, strengthening ties at a time when the U.S. itself is looking a bit more, shall we say, inward?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a bold move, no doubt about it. And China, well, they're not exactly known for letting opportunities like this slip through their fingers.
It's like a big game of chess, isn't it? Everyone making their moves, trying to anticipate the next one.
Right, and you got to wonder, what's the U.S.'s next move going to be?
I don't know, but I'm sure they're watching this all very, very closely. But let's get into the specifics here. One thing that really stood out to me was all this talk about green initiatives, sustainability.
Yeah, that's a big one these days. And it's not just talk either. They've actually got a whole agreement drawn up on climate change, clean energy.
And get this, China's getting ready to issue its first ever offshore sovereign green bond. And where are they doing it?
London.
London.
That's right. That's a huge vote of confidence in the UK's financial sector, especially for their green finance initiatives. This could draw in a lot of investment, potentially even pulling some away from the US. It's a really interesting development. Shows you where the world's priorities are shifting.
Totally. And it's not just about saving the planet, right? This is about hard economics. Who's got the edge in the financial markets? Who's attracting the big money? And then there's the whole market access thing. The UK's walked away with some pretty sweet deals, especially for things like pork, pet food, pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, those are some big wins for the UK. It's not just about those specific products either. This is about challenging the US's dominance in those markets, showing that there are other players in the game.
So less America first and more like everyone's invited to the party.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the UK is trying to carve out a different path for themselves, a more balanced approach to foreign policy, you could say. And it is definitely ruffling some feathers, making people rethink the whole global power structure.
So what you're saying is the UK is basically saying, hey, world, we're open for business and we're not afraid to play with the big boys.
Exactly.
And China's like, right back at you.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a pretty fascinating dynamic, isn't it?
Totally. And it makes you wonder, where does this all lead? What happens next?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing's for sure. Things are about to get interesting.
Oh, yeah. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Buckle up, folks. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah. It's a delicate dance, that's for sure. Got to keep all the plates spinning.
Because it's not all, just signing papers and shaking hands.
Yeah.
There's a lot of baggage, right? China's human rights record, their actions in the South China Sea, that's got to be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. You can't just ignore that stuff, especially when you're talking about building a deeper relationship. It's going to be interesting to see how the UK tries to balance things out. The economic opportunities are clearly there, but at what cost?
Yeah. It's a tough one for sure. And speaking of tough, how do you think the U.S. is feeling about all of this? I mean, you've got a key ally cozying up to, well, basically their biggest rival.
Yeah, I can't imagine they're popping champagne corks over in Washington. Right. This has got to be a bit of a wake-up call for them. A key ally deciding to forge stronger ties with their main competitor, that's got to sting a bit.
So are we looking at a potential power shift then? Is this a sign of things to come?
It's definitely possible, yeah. This partnership, if it actually works out, could signal a move away from the U.S.-dominated world order, towards a multipolar system, where power is not just concentrated in one place.
Okay, so what does that actually mean? Like, for someone like me, what would a multipolar world actually look like?
Well, basically, it means No single superpower calling all the shots. You'd have multiple centers of power, each with their own interests and agenda, kind of like a big, complicated game of chess, where every move has a ripple effect?
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So less about one country dictating everything and more about a bunch of different players all jockeying for position.
Exactly. It's a more fluid, dynamic system.
Hmm.
No clear-cut winners or losers, just a constant shifting of alliances and priorities.
And is that a good thing? I mean, it sounds like it could get pretty messy.
It's definitely more complex, that's for sure. But it also creates opportunities. In a multipolar world, countries have more freedom to forge partnerships based on shared interests rather than just sticking with the old established blocks.
So more flexibility, more options, but also more uncertainty.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a double-edged sword,
Hmm.
but it's definitely the direction things seem to be heading in.
Okay, so let's say this multipolar world actually does come to pass. What are the key things to watch for? What are the signs that it's happening?
Well, keep an eye on how countries are forming alliances and partnerships. The UK-China thing is a perfect example of that. Countries that were traditionally in the US camp are starting to look elsewhere, diversifying their interests.
So the old alliances are breaking down and new ones are forming, kind of like the tectonic plates shifting under our feet.
Exactly. And another big indicator is the rise of new centers of economic and political power.
Like who?
Well, look at the EU, for example. They're becoming a major player on the world stage. And India, too. And various African nations are starting to flex their muscles as well.
So it's not just about the US and China anymore. It's a multiplayer game now.
Exactly. It's getting crowded at the top,
Hmm.
and that's just going to make things more interesting, more unpredictable.
And probably a lot more challenging for everyone involved.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But it's also an exciting time to be alive,
Hmm.
witnessing this global transformation firsthand.
Okay, so we've talked about the political side of things, the power shifts, but what about the actual tangible impact on people's lives? How does all this high-level maneuvering trickle down to the average person?
Well, for one thing, it's going to affect the global economy in a big way. Trade patterns are going to shift, investment flows are going to change, certain countries are going to benefit, others are going to lose out.
So, winners and losers, as always.
Yeah, unfortunately. That's just the nature of the game. But there are also potential benefits for individuals. More opportunities for travel, for education, for cultural exchange. As the world becomes more interconnected, those barriers start to break down.
Hmm. So maybe a bit of both, good and bad, depending on where you stand.
Right, exactly. It's a mixed bag, like most things in life.
Okay.
But one thing's for sure, it's going to be interesting to watch it all unfold.
Okay, so all this talk about multipolar worlds and shifting power dynamics, it's a lot to take in. And it can feel a bit, well, abstract, you know? Like, how does it actually affect someone who's just trying to get by, pay the bills, live their life?
Yeah, I get that. It can seem very distant, very removed from everyday life. But the truth is, it affects us all in one way or another. Just think about the price of gas, for example.
Or, yeah, ouch.
Right, that's directly influenced by global events, by the actions of major powers. And the same goes for the cost of food, the availability of jobs, even the stability of our communities. Everything's connected in this globalized world.
So what you're saying is, even if we're not thinking about it, global politics is still shaping our lives in very real ways.
Exactly. We may not always see the connections, but they're definitely there.
So what can we do about it? I mean, as individuals, can we actually make a difference in all of this?
Well, I think the first step is just to be aware,
Mm.
to understand what's going on in the world, how it affects us, and what our options are. Once you've got that awareness, you can start to make informed choices
About what?
about everything. The products you buy, the companies you support, the politicians you vote for. Every decision we make, even the small ones, has an impact.
So it's about being conscious consumers, being engaged citizens.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility for our role in this global system.
And about realizing that we're not just passive observers. We can actually shape the world we live in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We all have that power, even if it doesn't always feel like it.
That's a pretty empowering thought. So where do we go from here? What's the next step on this journey toward a multipolar world?
Well, I think the key is to keep the conversation going, to keep asking questions, to keep challenging the status quo, and to keep pushing for a more just and equitable world.
So more dialogue, more collaboration, more understanding.
Exactly. It's not going to be easy, but it's definitely worth striving for.
All right, I'm sold. So how do we actually do that? What are the concrete steps we can take to make a difference?
Well, I think the first step is to educate ourselves, to learn about the different perspectives out there, to understand the complexities of the issues, and to develop a more nuanced view of the world.
So less black and white thinking, more shades of gray.
Exactly. It's about embracing complexity, recognizing that there are rarely easy answers.
And once we've got that understanding, then what?
Then we can start to engage with others, to have those tough conversations, to listen to different viewpoints, and to try to find common ground.
So bridge building, not wall building.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to connect with people who may see things differently than we do.
And hopefully through those connections, we can start to build a more peaceful and prosperous world.
That's the goal, anyway.
Well, it's a good goal, one worth striving for.
Absolutely.
It really is. Like we're all connected in ways we don't even realize.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, isn't it? And this UK-China thing, it just underscores that whole idea of a multipolar world, Power shifting, it's becoming more diffuse.
Multipolar, multipolar. We keep saying it. But what does that actually look like in real life? Paint me a picture.
Okay, so imagine a world where it's not just one or two superpowers calling all the shots.
Yeah.
Instead, you've got multiple centers of power, all kind of vying for influence, each with their own agenda, their own priorities.
Yeah.
It's a much more complex landscape, that's for sure.
So less about a global pecking order and more about like a network.
Exactly. It's all about relationships, alliances that shift and change. No clear-cut winners or losers, just a constant dance of power and influence.
Sounds kind of chaotic, honestly.
It can be, yeah. But it also creates opportunities. In a multipolar world, countries have more freedom to choose their partners, to pursue their own interests, rather than just falling in line behind one superpower and another.
Some more flexibility.
More flexibility, more options. But yeah, also more uncertainty, more risk. It's a double-edged sword, for sure.
Okay, so let's say this multipolar world does become reality. What should we be looking for? How will we know it's actually happening?
Well, pay attention to the alliances countries are forming. The UK-China deal is a great example. You're going to see more and more of that. Countries breaking away from traditional blocs, forging new partnerships.
Like a realignment of the global chessboard.
Exactly. And another thing to watch is the rise of new power centers. The EU is a big one. Obviously, India is another. And you've got a lot of African nations that are starting to make their presence felt on the world stage.
So it's not just the same old players anymore.
Nope. The game's changing. New players, new rules. It's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
And probably a bit nerve-wracking too, right? All this change, all this uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely. But it's also exciting. We're living through a truly historic moment. The world's being remade right before our eyes.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture stuff, the geopolitical shifts. But what about the impact on, regular